Hey friends, welcome back to Guess What? Compliance Can Be Simple. I'm your host, Dr. Natasha Guess, founder of Guess Compliance Consultant LLC, where I work with small and mid-sized healthcare teams to build compliance systems that actually function in real operational environments. Now, we have made it to the final episode of our Compliance in the Workflow series. And I want to close this series by pulling back. And I want to pull back from all of the frameworks and the steps and the regulatory requirements and talking about something that determines whether any of it actually works. Culture. Specifically, the culture inside your organization or practice around reporting, around transparency, and around what happens when something actually goes wrong. Because here's the truth that I have seen played out in practice after practice after practice. All of the policies in the world will not protect an organization whose people are afraid to use them. You can have the most well-written HIPAA policy in the state. You can have a beautifully documented incident response framework. You can have access logs and training records and vendor agreements that are in perfect order. But if your staff are afraid to raise their hand when something happens, every single one of those protections is compromised. As we know, compliance depends on early reporting. And early reporting depends on a culture where people believe that raising their hand is safe. I want to give you a scenario. A staff member makes a mistake, a document is misplaced, it actually contains patient information, and in the moment, they know they should report it, but they hesitate. They hesitate because they have watched what happens when other people report problems. They have seen their colleagues get questioned, get blamed, or get embarrassed in front of the entire team. And they have heard leaders respond to mistakes with frustration rather than process. So they have learned, not from policy, but from observation, that reporting creates problems for the person who reports it. So guess what? They wait. They check to see if the document surfaces on its own, and they hope that the situation resolves without intervention. And they tell themselves, this is probably not a big deal. 3 days has passed, and in those 3 days, the practice's regulatory exposure is grown. That 60-day notification clock, if applicable, has already been taken for 3 days without the organization even knowing it. And the evidence that should have been preserved on day 1 may have been disturbed. Now, if you think about that, the facts that were clear on day 1 are now subject to memory and reconstruction. That 3-day delay is not a personal failure. It is an organizational failure because your staff member was responding to the culture they had been trained by experience to expect. And that is the leadership's responsibility to own. Now let me talk to you about what mature compliance culture actually looks like. Because I don't want to just name the problem. I want to give you the picture to build towards. Mature compliance organizations encourage early reporting. They communicate consistently and clearly that reporting a potential breach is a professional responsibility, not an admission of guilt. They treat incidents as system events rather than individual failures. And they ask first, what happened in the workflow, not who did something wrong. Mature organizations separate reporting from punishment. And that doesn't mean that there are no consequences for intentional violations or repeated negligence. It just means that the first response to a reported incident is not a search for blame. It is a structured, it is a calm, professional response that moves through the assessment process and focuses on understanding what happened and how to prevent it from happening again. Mature organizations respond consistently. The leader who responds calmly to one reported incident and with frustration to the next is actually training their team that reporting is a gamble. Your consistency is what builds trust, and trust is what builds a reporting culture. Now, let me talk to you about what compliance looks like when it is embedded in every role in your practice. Because compliance is never a one person's job. It is everyone's workflow behavior. For the staff who manages systems, compliance looks like reviewing permissions early, removing that access immediately when someone separates from the organization or practice, and monitoring those access logs and flagging anomalies early. For the staff who supervise teams, compliance looks like modeling transparency. It looks like encouraging questions, responding to reported concerns without blame, and making sure documentation exists for every significant operational decision. And when every person in your practice or organization understands their compliance role, and when you have the culture that's supporting them in fulfilling it, the compliance operation stops being a separate function and becomes part of how your practice or organization simply works. That is what I mean when I say compliance can be simple. Not simple as in easy, simple as in clear, as in embedded, as in operational, and part of the daily workflow rather than a separate burden layered on top of it. Now, the practices I've worked with that have the strongest compliance operations are not the ones with the most sophisticated technology or the thickest policy binders. They're the ones where the practice manager has built a culture where staff feel safe, where systems are designed to make the right action the easiest action, and where compliance is understood as a team responsibility rather than a compliance officer's problem. That is what I want for every practice in this community. So let me close this series with the thing I most want you to carry with you. Compliance is not a department. It is workflow behavior. And workflow behavior is shaped by culture. The technology can be replaced. Your policies can be updated. Your frameworks can be refined. But the culture is what determines whether any of it works when it matters most. Build the culture first. Everything else will follow. I want to say thank you for spending this series with me. 8 episodes on operational compliance, pitfalls, incident response, and the culture that makes compliance work in the real world of small and mid-sized healthcare practices. I really hope it has given you something concrete to take back to your practice or organization. And if any part of this series raises questions about where your practice stands, I would love to have that conversation. Schedule a free compliance strategy call using the link in the show notes. And let us look at where your systems are and what it would take for you to make compliance simple for your team. I am Dr. Natasha Guess. Thank you for listening to Guess What? Compliance Can Be Simple. Until next time, keep it simple, stay compliant, and protect your patients.